Mic hookup and an audio level check. You think you're about ready?
Yeah, I think so, Bob. To tell you the truth, I'm a little worried as to whether or not everybody will get the message of what we're trying to do here today.
What do you mean?
Well, as I see it, we're trying to get our foremen to look at work zone setups in such a way that they can analyze them.
That's it.
Well, technically it is, but I'm a little concerned that they don't realize how important this is. Our foremen see these work zone setups every day, and I don't think that they realize how difficult it might be for the uninformed motorist.
I'm afraid I don't follow that.
Well, the purpose of today's program is to review methods for evaluating these schemes and then to recognize their inefficiencies, okay? And then we should tell them how to correct them.
Well, that's what the script says.
Well, I hope we can sell them on the idea that it's not only for the safety of the motoring public, it's for the safety of their workers and for their own safety. And that's really the reason we're here today.
Well, I guess the best we can do is give it a shot. Why don't you sit down here and we'll get this thing all fixed up electronically. Fix your coat. Okay, comfortable?
Right.
Okay.
The purpose of this program is to emphasize the importance of inspecting and evaluating work zone traffic control. This particular program will deal only with the inspection and evaluation of short-term operations. Later in the program, you will be viewing several short-term work sites and will be given the opportunity to inspect and evaluate the traffic control that was provided at each of these work sites. But first, let's discuss why it's important for you to inspect your work zone. The purpose of inspection is to ensure that your work zone complies with the regulations contained in Department Publication 203. Regular inspection is also necessary to ensure that all devices are correctly positioned, clean, legible, and in overall good condition. Why is it important to evaluate your work zone? The answer to this question is simple. No matter how carefully and precisely you have planned and installed a work zone traffic control scheme, the real test is how well it works in the field. Even traffic control schemes that are generally adequate can often be refined and improved as a result of periodic observation and review. Regular evaluation of your work zone traffic control is imperative for other reasons as well. Work zones experience changing conditions, and these must be taken into account. Weather or light conditions may change, traffic volumes may vary with time and location, and roadway conditions and design, such as road width, number of lanes, sight distance, speed limits, and many other factors, are quite likely to vary for work areas that progress along a roadway. How often should a work zone be inspected and evaluated? Without question, each work zone should be inspected and evaluated immediately after the initial installation. Thereafter, the work zone should be re-inspected periodically to determine the condition of the devices. Finally, the work zone should be also evaluated after any traffic control modifications are made. How does one actually inspect and evaluate a work zone? The best method is to drive through the work zone in an attempt to obtain the motorist viewpoint. Try to put yourself in the shoes of the unfamiliar driver. What does he see? What does he expect to encounter? Or worse, what does he encounter that he does not expect? For the remainder of the program, you will need a copy of Department Publication 203. In addition, prior to viewing each problem, your instructor will distribute a workbook. The first part of the workbook will contain information such as type of roadway, average daily traffic, speed limit, and other pertinent information. The second part of the workbook has a checklist listing inspection and evaluation items. For each problem on this tape, you will first be shown the worksite prior to the beginning of work. You will then be asked to inspect and evaluate the traffic control scheme that was installed using the checklist provided. Therefore, you will have to pay close attention to the tape. The tape will then stop and you will be given ample time to complete your workbook and discuss your findings and suggestions for improvement. After this group discussion, your instructor will restart the tape and it will proceed to explain the various items needing correction, followed by the work zone showing all items corrected. The tape will now stop for your instructor to distribute and explain the workbook prior to problem number 1.
Welcome to this work site where you will be doing a slow-moving, short-term operation. You will be closing the southbound lane on this rural two-lane, two-way highway with a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit. Please pay close attention as we now drive through the area, beginning in the southbound direction where the lane will be closed, followed by the northbound direction.
The tape will now stop to allow you to select the appropriate typical figure in Publication 203 using the information contained in your workbook and taking into consideration the conditions you just saw. The appropriate typical figure for this work is figure 11A. We will now be asking you to inspect and evaluate the traffic control that was provided at this work site using the checklist contained in your workbook along with figure 11A. See if you can identify items that do not comply with Publication 203, as well as actions that can be taken to improve the traffic control provided. Document your findings using the checklist. After you have seen the traffic control scheme from both directions, the tape will stop to allow you to discuss your findings and recommendations for improvement with your instructor and your peers. So now let's inspect the work zone traffic control, beginning first with the southbound direction, immediately followed by the northbound direction. The tape will now stop to allow you to discuss your findings and suggestions for improvement. We will now identify items that did not comply with Publication 203 and discuss actions that can be taken to improve the traffic control. We will begin with the southbound approach, followed by the northbound approach. It is important to place work zone signs a sufficient distance away from existing permanent signs and other work zone signs so that drivers will have adequate time to read and react to each sign. Signs must also be in good condition to command the respect of motorists, and so that they can be easily read. We are approaching a flagger who is located over the crest of a hill. Signs serve no purpose unless they are clearly visible to approaching traffic. This northbound work area head sign should be at a spot where it is not obscured by vegetation. With the exception of emergencies or when flagging within an intersection, a stop and slow paddle should always be used to control one-lane, two-way traffic. As you can see, a stop and slow paddle is more clearly understood by motorists than a flag. For safety reasons, it is important for each flagger to be clearly visible to approaching motorists. It is also important that a flagger be able to see approaching traffic. Therefore, this flagger should have been positioned at or prior to the crest of the hill, as shown here. Now let's take a quick trip through the same work zone showing all items corrected. Once again, we will begin with the southbound direction, immediately followed by the northbound direction. The tape will now stop for questions and to allow your instructor to introduce the next problem.
You have been assigned to do a stationary short-term operation in the northbound lane of this two-lane, two-way rural highway. The speed limit is 35 miles per hour. We will now drive through the area where the work will take place, beginning first in the northbound lane, which will be closed, followed by the southbound lane.
The tape will now stop for you to select the appropriate typical figure in Publication 203 using the information contained in your workbook and taking into consideration the conditions you just saw. The appropriate typical figure for this work is figure 10A. We will now be asking you to inspect and evaluate the traffic control that was provided at this work site using the checklist contained in your workbook along with figure 10A. Again, see if you can identify items that do not comply with Publication 203 as well as actions that can be taken to improve the traffic control provided. Document your findings using the checklist. After you have seen the traffic control scheme from both sides, the tape will stop to allow you to discuss your findings and recommendations for improvement. So now let's inspect the work zone traffic control, beginning with the northbound direction, followed by the southbound direction. The tape will now stop for you to discuss your findings and recommendations for improvement. We will now point out items that did not comply with regulations and discuss actions that can be taken to improve the traffic control. We will begin with the northbound direction, followed by the southbound direction. In order to attract attention, this warning sign should have 3 orange flags as required by Publication 203. The regulations also require a 1-foot minimum mounting height to the bottom of the sign. It is very important that signs are properly placed in sign frames to ensure that they will maintain their proper alignment and visibility. At its present location, this flagger sign is partially obscuring sight distance for the motorists emerging from the side road. Here is the view that side road drivers have with the flagger sign at this location. In addition, by moving this sign downstream of the intersection, motorists making a right turn from the side road would now see a flagger sign prior to the work area. Notice that this flagger is not wearing the required orange vest, shirt, or jacket, which would enhance his visibility. For his own safety and that of the work crew, he should also be paying close attention to the approaching traffic. That is, he should not have his back turned towards approaching traffic. This taper does not have a minimum of 6 cones, nor is it at least 50 feet long. A flagger sign at this location is necessary to provide an adequate warning of a flagging operation that may require them to slow down or stop. Now let's take a look at this work zone with all items corrected, beginning first with the northbound approach, followed by the southbound approach.
Okay, that's a wrap.
Hey, all done. That wasn't so bad, huh?
Not at all. Interesting experience.
Yeah, I think it's a good program. I really think if they, if they do those things that you talked about on the screen, it's got to get better.
Can't hurt anything. Not at all. Hope it helps.
Point.
The purpose of this program is to emphasize the importance of correctly setting up work zone traffic control on short-term operations. This particular program will deal with the actual short-term setups of figures 14, a stationary short-term operation on a 3-lane two-way roadway with a center lane, and figure 18, a stationary or slow-moving short-term operation on a divided or one-way highway. The design and installation of short-term work zones must be viewed from two different points of view. First, drivers consider work zones as impediments to their trip, the cause of delays, and in many cases a source of aggravation and frustration. Secondly, maintenance and construction workers view work zones as their office, the place where they perform the duty for which they have been employed. The driver wants a work zone that is clearly marked and causes him the least delay. The worker wants a work zone that allows him to work in a safe environment. Although we must consider both these needs in determining the type of traffic control plan to use, safety of both the driver and the worker must be our primary objectives. Last year, approximately 1,800 accidents occurred in Pennsylvania work zones. 20 people were killed and another 1,100 were injured. Not a good record, but one that we feel can be improved on if we use common sense and properly apply the methods outlined in Publication 203. By now, most of you have heard about or in some way have been involved in a civil or tort suit against a department because of our loss of sovereign immunity. Without getting into the details of sovereign immunity, tort liability or risk management, let me simply say that any failure on our part to follow our own policies and procedures or use good engineering judgment exposes us to the real possibility of being sued if this failure results in someone's death or injury. Since our loss of sovereign immunity, we have paid out well over $1 million in tort claims involving accidents in our work zones. In many cases, a minor deviation from the required plan, a missing sign, an inadequate taper length, the wrong barricade, was judged to be sufficient evidence of negligence on our part, and therefore made us liable for all or part of the cost of the claim. Although I realize that we will never eliminate all accidents in work zones, it should be our goal to minimize them and to ensure that when they do happen, it is not due to our negligence or poor judgment. The manner in which traffic control setups are installed and removed affects both safety and traffic flow. We will now show you the proper sequence for installation and removal of work zone traffic control for figures 14 and 18, taken out of Publication 203.
This work area is a stationary short-term operation on a 3-lane two-way roadway with a center lane left turn only pattern. The work area is one of the through lanes and the speed limit along the highway is 45 miles per hour. Figure 14 will be used to establish the work zone traffic control. The tape will now stop, so you may turn to Figure 14 in publication 203. In order to determine where the taper should start, the foreman must determine what, if any, equipment will be located on each side of the work area. On the end beyond the work area, channelizing devices should be continued past the work area or any equipment for a distance of 1/2 to 1 C, where C equals 2 times the speed limit. This spot should be marked either physically or mentally. The taper that closes the center lane should begin L distance from the last channelizing device closing off the work area. On the beginning end of the work area, there should be at least 200 to 300 feet of distance from the work area to the end of the taper. Therefore, the taper should begin about 200 plus L feet or 300 plus L feet in front of the beginning of the work area. This spot should also be marked. Table 3 in publication 203 should be consulted to find the minimum desirable taper lengths and maximum spacing of channelizing devices. The spacing of the devices in the taper is also shown in the chart on Figure 14. For this particular type of roadway, with a speed limit of 45 miles per hour and a lane width of 12 feet, we should have 13 devices placed at 90-foot intervals in the taper, and the minimum taper length should be 540 feet long. The proper sequence for work zone traffic control installation shall begin with the work area ahead sign on the through lane opposite the work area. The work area ahead sign should be erected 2 times A plus the length of the taper, plus the distance beyond the work area to the last channelizing device closing off the work area. This spot should have been previously marked. Next, the center lane closed ahead sign should be erected a distance from the work area ahead sign towards the work area, and the taper should begin a distance from the center lane closed ahead sign. The center lane closed ahead sign is an optional sign, and when it is not used, the work area ahead sign should be placed a distance plus the taper length plus the distance to the work area from the last channelizing device closing off the work area. Following the installation of the center lane closed ahead sign, the taper can be installed in the center lane. The taper should begin a distance from the center lane closed ahead sign. Following the installation of the taper in the center lane, the longitudinal channelizing devices may be placed. The spacing of longitudinal channelizing devices can also be found on the chart on Figure 14. In this case, the spacing would be 90 feet. The longitudinal line of channelizing devices should end a minimum of D plus L from the spot in advance of the work area previously marked by the foreman before the initial setup. Then the end work area sign should be erected D distance from the end of the longitudinal line of channelizing devices. Now the work area ahead sign should be installed on the same side of the roadway as the work area. This sign should be erected A distance plus the taper length in advance of the spot previously marked by the foreman. Next, the taper is installed using the same taper length previously utilized for closing the center lane. Next, an arrow panel or temporary arrow sign, G40-1, may be erected at the beginning of the taper. This sign is optional, but we will use a flashing arrow panel with the left arrow flashing. Following the installation of the taper, the longitudinal channelizing devices are installed from the end of the taper to the point previously marked. The end work area sign should now be erected d distance from the end of the taper that transfers the vehicles back to their original lane. And finally, a shadow vehicle with a revolving yellow light may be positioned within the closed work lane to provide protection, and work may then begin. Now that the traffic control is set up, let's take a drive through our work zone and review the work zone traffic control. After the work is completed, the work zone traffic control can be removed. The shadow vehicle should be removed first. Next, the channelizing devices should be removed, starting with the cones that were surrounding the work area, followed by the cones in the taper. Next, the removal of the channelizing devices in the center lane should begin. First, the taper should be removed, followed by the removal of the longitudinal line of devices. Now the sign should be removed, starting with the work area head sign that was on the same side of the roadway as the work area. Next, the end work area sign on this side of the roadway should be removed. Now the work area head sign on the opposite side should be removed, followed by the removal of the center lane closed ahead sign. Finally, the end work area sign on the opposite side of the roadway should be removed. The roadway is now reopened to the normal traffic pattern. The tape will now stop for your instructor to answer any questions that you may have. This work area is a stationary operation with the work area in the left lane of a 4-lane divided freeway. Figure 18 will be used to establish the work zone traffic control. The speed limit for this section of highway is 55 miles per hour. All signs except the end work area sign must be a minimum of 48 inches by 48 inches, since the work area is on a freeway. Work area ahead signs should be erected on both sides of the highway, if the median is wide enough to accommodate the signs. Be especially careful when crossing the highway. The tape will now stop, so you may turn to Figure 18 in Publication 203. After arriving at the work site and determining where they will start and end the work area, the foreman must determine where to place the first sign. All required advance warning signs should be installed first, so the protection is provided when channelizing devices are installed around the work area. In this example, the work area ahead sign should be placed on each side of the road if possible, 2 times a quarter mile, plus the length of the taper found in Table 3 of Publication 203, plus the distance to the work area from the end of the taper, usually about 200 feet. The right lane closed ahead sign should then be erected 1/4 mile from the work area head signs towards the work area and on both sides of the road if possible. The flashing arrow panel, or temporary arrow sign, G40-1, is then erected on the shoulder 1/4 mile from the right lane closed ahead sign, towards the work area. The required arrow panel should be a minimum of 6 feet by 3 feet for the 55 mile/hour speed limit. The minimum size for an arrow panel or sign will be